that has been put through the accelerator and working with the team here, Barclays understand that it's very easy to crush the life out of a startup organization. And understanding how a large enterprise plays nice with an innovative startup has been fundamental for our growth. But let's get back to where we see the market and more specifically the trends that we're observing. So I recommend, if you haven't read it already or visited already, the Financial Brand. It's a site curated by Jim Maris. He does some excellent work on forecasting trends, and he put up this quote about how financial institutions are trying to drive value out of AI. I think this is now an 8-month-old quote, so even now this is beginning to look dated as people are realizing the cost reductions and revenue generations from AI projects. But some of the use cases that we are observing, Alex made the point that actually it's a relatively limited amount of machine learning techniques that are making the difference. It's unlikely, and with deference to my data science colleagues in the room, it's unlikely that we're going to see a massive explosion of new techniques and new applications of machine learning. Actually, we're just going to see enhancements of existing techniques. But where we will see growth is within the use cases as the enterprise opens up more data, more business units, and stands up new programs. So I won't delve into this into too great detail. I think most of this speaks for itself. But fraud, I think, was perhaps the first use case where there was significant investment putting into application of ML. Partly, I think, because it's the tide that rises all boats. There is appetite to be collaborative around tackling fraud, and also there's the data points there. So we're seeing that kind of fraud was our gateway drug for machine learning application, but very quickly we're seeing kind of that phase through to understanding risk. I think we are seeing that the last 18 months, 2 years have been around data hygiene within risk teams, codifying their risk programs, and then understanding how models can make a difference. Trading, obviously this is the one that gets the IB guys excited, how they can enhance their trading. And actually we're seeing with the systematic traders who engage with Seldon, they are extremely proprietary about their data science. They don't want us anywhere near the algorithm. They see Seldon's value in the chain as providing them competitive advantage by getting those models out the door faster. Their ability to iterate quickly is their competitive advantage. And then I'm going to conflate these two for brevity. Customer experience and customer engagement, the whole idea of understanding your customer and where they sit within the journey. I've read a really interesting piece by Stephen Van Bossen. He compares ML to mobile in the early parts of this century, where actually people were demanding mobile experiences for not just banking, but kind of the whole gamut of user experience. Now, ML will encourage or generate demand for always on, always personalized, open attitudes to services and features. So I'm going to talk about 6 trends that we're observing in financial services and the organizations that are driving those. Welcome your challenge on any of these, please feel free to dive in. Let's start with the thorny beast of regulation. We talk about data science being a team sport. And in fact, regulatory compliance is just as much a group effort. Alex talked about how the Institute for Ethical AI is progressing kind of human in the loop, that requirement for human eyes on a particular challenge or application. However, we are seeing increasingly that models to mitigate for models or XAI are becoming much more prevalent. And in fact, Seldon are developing what we like to describe as metamodels, things like explanation. Why is a model doing what it's doing? Why is that model declining that person credit? Is it because of their income, their number of dependents, and their debt? Or is it actually because of their name or their ethnicity and all of these problematic reasons for potentially why a model might be declining them credit? And when you're applying a neural network, for example, or a very non-linear model, you need that level of explanation to satisfy your compliance and regulatory teams. In fact, we talked with one organization who has blackballed any use of neural networks within their ML for that exact reason, because they can't provide the explanation. Now, that's a very short-term fix. And so XAI will step up to extract the indicators of the training data that are driving that model's decision.
Questions now?
No, let me finish this one. The final point on this particular trend, a trend we're observing coming out of the US, compliance teams now have procurement budget for ML. You know, the meta model, the explainer, that is something increasingly that procurement teams, that compliance teams are calling for. Paul, sorry, you had a question.
Do you see that as almost like a different class of machine learning on machine learning, or do you just see it as we need to make sure we enhance the algorithms to be able to explain what they're doing as well as doing it?
I think that standards in this space are going to be extremely difficult. The moment you kind of put them in place, a model either works its way around it, or that model becomes redundant. That standard becomes redundant very quickly. I think actually the areas where we can ensure compliance more powerfully are this use of metamodels. This idea of, can I audit the metamodel? Can I make sure that my backstop is checking for everything? Because as your applications get grander and grander, yes, you want to keep that human in the loop, but that human in the loop is going to require curation tools. And to me, that looks like explainer models that they can sit on top of their ML use cases.
Let's add very briefly to that. So data scientists shouldn't be concerned with building a model which is explainable. It's up to the people building the explainers to interpret those black boxes. One of the things I think is highlighted from members of our tech team, CTO, is that explainers really only as good as how they can convince people that they are giving good explanations. So in a way, like kind of almost in a way going the same way as GANs. I'm sure people are familiar with the concept of generative adversarial networks, which are trying to sort of generate images by having two MLs which fight against each other to improve the generative images. And so in that same concept, over time there'll be a war between explainers models, which are trying to outwit humans to convince them that the explanations are accurate. So it's an interesting one, really. I think.
So data management, this is still the top 3 blocker for successful application of machine learning, just getting the data out of the building. And again, what are the standards? What are the principles, best practice that we're aspiring to? Understanding data governance, providing transparency of that. Alex touched upon versioning within kind of the data pipeline. Something that we are observing as a trend is the idea of cloud portability. 2 years ago, when we began building out our FSI products, everything we were doing was POC on-premise. Now, the majority of our POCs start on an on-premise environment, but the scope has changed. Now, our customers are coming to us and saying, this starts on-premise, but I want to understand what happens in 6 months' time when I move this to my cloud provider, and I want to run a hybrid or multi-cloud strategy. Increasingly, we're getting called upon to describe how we're going to take that model from an on-premise environment to a cloud environment where they can leverage cost benefits of compute. And you'll see that grow as the one ring to rule them all strategy of cloud provider is fading away. The idea of I'm going to select my cloud partners based on the requirements of my particular strategies, my particular project demands. So understanding how that data moves from on-premise to cloud is going to become fundamental. Yeah, I've included the Google quote here. Google like to talk about their shiny algorithms and their model tuning. Fundamentally, Google's advantage as an AI business is about their data and not about the power of their algorithms. Security, yeah, I think this one kind of speaks for itself. The one point I would make here is that you're going to see security drive some interesting bedfellows. You're going to see initiatives or alliances with organizations that understand this space better than traditional financial services regulators. The FCA is a prime example. The FCA themselves are running sandboxes with organizations like Seldon to understand how do they tackle application of regulation, how do they understand security in this new world. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is a good example. That's not an FSI body, that's not even a regulator, but they are driving open source projects to understand how you can ensure security within our domain. The other aspect of kind of the machine learning pipeline, if we understand that data is one of the key blockers, the other aspect is skills. And at $120,000 a year, the average FSI data scientist is a very expensive resource and very difficult to scale. Hiring your way out of the problem is not a viable strategy. So we're seeing commoditization of the ML frameworks. The idea of we're all going to be citizen data scientists, that's happening at a pace. But also the understanding of, rather than put my best guns on the project at the beginning and then put my juniors on it when I want to deploy it, actually it's the reverse. Train that model, great, get your benchmarks, your baseline model performance on, but actually where the rubber hits the road, when you want to apply that model to the business, is absolutely where you want your key skill sets. And the handover from data scientist to DevOps needs to be as smooth as possible. Seldon were in conversation with a client very recently, and we were talking to them about their pipeline, and their data science team, so training models on a fairly rapid frequency, had zero feedback loop from the DevOps team that were deploying it. So as that model was potentially decaying, the data science team had no visibility of that. And they were cognizant of this, and they were aware that actually that was a broken aspect of their pipeline. And so the DevOps team would come back in 6 months and say, this model's broken, I don't even know why, because I wasn't responsible for the training and building, and I had no visibility of that. So creating that virtuous loop is going to become more and more important aspects of the workflow that Alex touched upon. I'm going to rush through these because I'm conscious that we have Simon here and I don't want to talk over him too much. But speed to market, this is going to create new business models. We're going to see very quickly that if your portfolio, I'm using stats actually that have been shared with me by a fellow cohort company, Forward Lane. They're seeing portfolio sizes have grown 100% over the last 5 years. So if your portfolio has gone from 4 to 400, then you absolutely need to understand how ML can help you curate all of those signals. But in so doing, you're going to expose new revenue lines, new alliances, new opportunities. Human relationships are going to be absolutely key to that, but actually now being able to tap into this curated set of data is going to drive some interesting business models. And obviously the big issue that kind of we all face on a day-to-day, if I'm running a decade-old SaaS system, how do I stand up something new that can actually exploit the potential of ML and AI? This new landscape demands plug and play. You're going to see greater growth for appetite for open source projects. Full disclosure, Seldon Core is an open source project, but we are seeing that organizations are coming to us and saying, we want Seldon to be a component of what we are doing. Google Kubeflow, IBM Fabric for deep learning, Intel OpenVINO, all historically closed tech businesses are now opening up big open source projects at the behest of their customer base. So finally, can't have a slide without some numbers. This is kind of our top-down analysis of where we're seeing these trends deliver in terms of budget and numbers. So obviously huge amounts of budget forecast to be spent within our space. How does this break down? Actually, a quick show of hands, who is familiar with the term Kubernetes, containers? Okay, so yeah, everyone understands kind of what we're talking about. Kubernetes is perhaps Seldon's single biggest dependency. We are able to abstract everything to a cluster, and so it's fundamental for us to understand what does Kubernetes adoption look like within large enterprise. And so we're seeing that actually this is a huge driver for that trend I observed about sunsetting that legacy tech. Kubernetes will be the catalyst that drives the standing up of these new ML executions. I would say actually, 70% of our conversations currently are not machine learning, not algorithms, but are architecture, containers, deployment, scaling. These are all of the challenges that the enterprise face now. We don't have to be evangelists for ML anymore. Now it's about understanding, okay, how do we deploy this and scale? We touched upon kind of the functions within a data science pipeline. Andy, are we?
Yeah, we'll move on.
Can we hand over to Simon?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Steve. Lee and Alex.